The following is an audio ebook of The Shadow People by new and upcoming author Benjamin Dassut. I would ask you all to head over to his Amazon page, the link's in the description, and download the Kindle edition and give him a 5-star review to help grow his exposure and the people that the book can reach. This book is an 18 and not suitable for children, so please only listen if you're over 18 years of age. Enjoy the production.
The Shadow People by Benjamin Dassut. Performed by Benjamin Dassut, Lewis Kirk, and Nicole Ferreira. Chapter 1. The moonlight flickered through the paper-thin, pale green curtains as Simon lay restless, tossing and turning in his hospital bed. The new medication Dr. Andrews had given him last week had been keeping him up all night. He'd been admitted to the hospital several weeks back now, and was still getting used to the way things were run, the ice-cold tone of Dr. Andrews' voice, the long list of different medications that didn't seem to work for anyone. Unless, of course, you consider being asleep for 20 hours of the day helpful, not to mention the wailing screams that ricocheted off the corridor at night, making all the other patients wake up in a disoriented frenzy like a pack of unhinged baboons. Evidently, since he'd been admitted to Franklin Medical Center, Dr. Andrews had given him 5 different types of medication, but none of them seemed to work. This one was slightly better, but painfully, it was keeping him up all through the night. Then, in the day, they flushed his body clean with all different types of unpronounceable mood stabilizers, some that would leave a horse in a puddle of dribble. But even with a dose so strong, he could still see the shadow people. Luckily, they'd stopped telling him what to do, for now.
"Hey, Si, are you awake?"
A voice whispered, 5 beds from his right in a husky East London accent.
"Yeah? Shall we try again? Who's working tonight?" "Fuck knows, but there's only one way of finding out."
Simon sat up in his bed. The man who had been talking to him was in his late 50s. His name was Curtis. Curtis was from a rough estate in East London, and it was written all over his aging face, especially in his dark, deep, sunken eyes. They were almost dead from what he had witnessed in his life, but, to his own detriment, what he was and had always been was a bit of a risk-taker. Tonight, he wanted to rob as much Xanax as humanly possible, not so he could take it and fizzle into nothing, oh no. He just wanted to ruffle some feathers, and the more, the better. Simon didn't exactly know why Curtis was in hospital, and to be fair, he thought it was best not to ask him. In some ways, Curtis was rather frightening. He spent most of the day sitting in the same chair, rocking back and forth, facing the wall, drawing pictures of insects getting their limbs chopped off by a rusty, blood-ravished machete.
"Okay, just don't do the same thing you done before."
Simon said, with an abundance of distrust and anxiety building rapidly in his eyes like a forest fire. Curtis smiled.
"Don't be silly. Them days are behind me."
Simon just wanted to sleep. The medication they gave him during the day made him feel groggy, almost like he was the walking dead. But it didn't make him sleep because it made his legs twitch like he was being electrocuted all day long, making him want to rip his own throat out and give it to the shadow people on a silver platter. In some ways he longed for their return, but at the same time he was terrified. Terrified because he was almost certain they wanted him dead, chopped up into long slivers of meat and then fed to Satan's ravens. He'd made his mind up, though. He was more than willing to roll this tortuous dice if it meant getting a few hours' kip. Slowly, Simon and Curtis got out of bed. They were both wearing hospital gowns. They were grey and tied tightly by an old cotton string behind their backs. They had to wear them at night because it made it that much easier for the staff at the hospital to render them unconscious with an injection straight into their buttocks. But this didn't matter to Simon or Curtis, even though it was for different reasons. Simon was the first one to leave the dormitory. He paced up the corridor with his mind racing like a runaway train hurtling off the tracks into the devil's dungeon. His mind melted back to what he once was. Oh, how he longed to have that back. "Mr. Miller, can I help you?" Simon turned. It was one of the so-called nurses. In truth, they were more like bouncers at a nightclub. Most of them were well over 6 foot, and they all had muscles on top of muscles, like Olympic powerlifting wrestlers, only on a lot more steroids.
Yeah, I need to use the toilet.
Simon said. The nurse paused a moment before saying, "Okay, come with me." Suddenly, an extremely loud, clustering smash echoed from the other end of the corridor.
The devil's blood! The devil's blood!
Quickly, almost like a shaved weasel being electrocuted, Curtis injected his presence into the corridor. He was rolling on the floor, standing up and smashing his body like a javelin into the wall.
It's inside me!
He screamed at the nurse, who was now rolling up his sleeves and walking towards him with one thing in mind. But before the nurse could do anything, Curtis stuck his grubby, hairy hands down his trousers and pulled out a clump of steaming hot shit the size of a mango. Aggressively, he flung his fecal matter at the nurse, hitting him directly in his face, before wiping it all over his own like it was nothing but face paint.
Get your fucking army!
He screamed. With that, the nurse hit a red button on the wall. Then, within a matter of seconds, the floor started to shake as a team of heavy-handed, bodybuilder-like nurses rapidly charged the corridor. But this was all part of the plan, because as they came bounding into the corridor like a rugby team, jumping on Curtis and wrestling him to the ground, Simon slipped his hand into one of their pockets and stole a set of keys. Slyly, he snuck out the door and was now heading to the room where they kept all the drugs, with his heart pumping in his chest like he'd just had a shot of adrenaline pumped into a main artery. Then, out of nowhere, a hand grabbed him by his face and pulled him to the ground from behind. Simon looked up. It was a nurse, and he had an injection raised up in his hands. Suddenly, he stabbed it down into Simon's leg like he was fishing with a spear, before slowly injecting him with that thick green substance that felt like it was ripping through the inside of his leg like a flamethrower. This didn't send Simon to sleep, though. Oh no. It put him in an almost paralyzed state in which he could still hear, see, and take everything in, only he wasn't able to do anything about it. The nurse got on his walkie-talkie and started talking to his colleagues, asking for backup and a straitjacket. Simon lay there, wishing he could stab that nurse with the same venom. Then, within the blink of an eye, he could hear the smashing sound of elephant-like footsteps while he lay there, not able to move. He knew that was the rest of them.
It's okay. We can get them next time.
A distorted voice scratched in his ear, while he got violently hoisted up, bundled into a straitjacket and dragged to a padded cell, with his body dragging stiff on the floor. Chapter 2. On the third day after the injection, Simon was slowly gaining his ability to talk and move. Tragically, he'd soiled himself in that time more than once, only to be left in the darkened room for hours on end with the lights flickering, every now and then in an almost detached manner, making him feel like his soul was separating from his body. The food they'd been giving him was non-existent. He'd been given an IV on the second day, which didn't make him feel replenished at all. It made him feel like his skin was burning in a pot of scalding coals, drenched in hellfire and brimstone. His mouth was dry too, so dry in fact, it had started to crack, leaving a blood-red cluster of blisters in his mouth, which were now popping whenever he ran his sandpaper-like tongue across the roof of his mouth. And on the second day, just as he was gaining his mobility back, 3 nurses with necks as thick as bulls cracked his heavy iron door open and tied him by his hands and feet to a cold iron bed with a paper-thin mattress. But on the third day, it was Dr. Andrews who cracked open the door to the cell Simon was trapped in. Dr. Andrews looked kind of like a cross between a ferret and a balding Jim Carrey. He was in his 40s and was divorced. His wife had had an affair with one of his patients. She'd even had sex with him in his office while he was in a meeting. It had left a bitter, vile taste in his mouth, and it showed. He had heavy, sagging bags under his eyes that could have been used as a sleeping bag. His lips were thin, and he had a chronic case of halitosis from where he'd not taken care of himself. "Mr. Miller," Dr. Andrews said, closing the door behind himself before walking over to Simon's bed in a somewhat arrogant way, "this didn't need to happen, did it?" But Simon could barely talk.
Help me!
was the wailing cry that struggled to erupt out his dry, cracked mouth. It was then Dr. Andrews slithered his Exmoor-covered, shriveled hand into his jacket pocket and pulled out the keys Simon stole off the nurse. He swayed them arrogantly on the tip of his flaky finger, with almost a satisfied energy creeping into the corners of his thin, pursed lips. Suddenly he stared down the rim of his reading glasses and said in an emotionless tone, "You're here to get better." Quickly he snatched the keys like he was catching a tennis ball before shoving them firmly into his pocket. "And I don't think you're ready to come out of this room," he added, while Simon grew desperate with a profuse layer of panic.
No, please,
Simon tried to say.
I'll be good.
Dr. Andrews leant over and whispered in Simon's ear, 2 weeks. With that, he turned and left, slamming the door and locking it on his way out. Chapter 3. 2 more weeks and 1 injection later, Simon was back in the main body of the hospital, but his friend Curtis was nowhere to be seen. He'd religiously asked the staff where he was, but the most he got back, other than the cold shoulder, was, "I don't know who you're talking about," and "Do you want to go back to that room?" If he wasn't on so many sedatives, this would have sent him into a frenzy like a pit bull protecting its owner, but it didn't. The sedatives that they gave him made him feel like he was walking around in a different dimension, and not in a good way. In a way that made his mind distort further into his warped reality, in which the shadow people were ever present, twisting and spiraling around the room in a ghostly fashion. "Come with us," they were saying to him. "We are one of you." Slumped deep in a chair in the recreation room, Simon watched the other patients mumbling to themselves. Mind you, not all of them were like this. Some of them you wouldn't even think should be there, but these people were the most dangerous of all. They were the type of people who had done the most hideous of crimes in a blunder of terror and misery. Some had killed their own mother, some had killed their own children. One man had drowned his baby because he thought it was the Antichrist. Simon had been watching him. He, the man who killed his daughter, had been watching the shopping channel on TV, and the whole time Simon had been watching him, the man had been crying. Only he wasn't fitting in a fit of hysteria and madness. He was very quiet, rocking back and forth, and scratching his fingernails in an obsessive fashion against his baggy denim trousers. Normally he didn't draw any attention to himself. Normally he had a sort of eccentric charisma about him, like he was a carny working at the fair on the dodgems, but in a flash he stood to his feet and screamed.
He's back!
Suddenly he shot his hand into his pocket and pulled out a sharp shard of plastic from a bottle of shampoo he'd been sharpening and stuck it deep into his neck, but luckily it bent back, ricocheting into his hand, sending him into a fit of anger. He picked up his chair and threw it as hard as he could at the TV, making it crack down the middle like a spider web. But in that moment a squad of jacked up nurses came steaming in like a juggernaut, swiping the man clean off his feet. Quickly they moved him out of the room, kicking and screaming for forgiveness in a tone no one would ever forget, not even the devil himself. Even Simon, who was now itching his flesh in the most draining, robotic of ways, would never forget.
"Hello, Simon."
A familiar voice echoed in Simon's ears. Simon looked up. It was his mother. She had a bouquet of flowers in her hands and a blotted puddle of heartbroken tears in her eyes. Timidly she walked over to her troubled son, with the bouquet of flowers grasped tightly in her anxious grip.
Mum, you came. I've missed you.
"How have you been, sweetie?"
She asked him, sitting on a chair next to him.
Yeah, good.
He lied.
Hey, are those for me?
He added, referring to the flowers that were still grasped anxiously in her grip.
"Oh, sorry, yeah."
She said, passing them to her son. Simon's mum was in her late 70s. Her husband, his father, had passed away a few years before Simon's condition got worse. Luckily, he got to see his son when he wasn't so unwell. He still saw the shadow people back then, but it wasn't during the day, and they weren't talking to him, giving him distorted suggestions of death and violence. Back then, a doctor had told him that he had a bad case of sleep paralysis. You might have even experienced this yourself. Some talk of an old haggard lady sitting on their chest. Some even say they see a demon sitting on their chest with long, withered fingers that stretch out like a spider's legs. In fact, in some cultures they say that this is a ghost. In the Western world, however, they say it's a sleeping disorder from lack of sleep. In Simon's world, though, they were now fully emerged, telling him to do the most unspeakable of acts.
Thanks. How have you been?
Good.
She lied.
Had some lunch with a few friends yesterday in town. Was nice. Be good when you get out of here, so we can go.
Yeah. I've made you something.
Simon bent down and pulled a note out of his sock.
Don't open it now. Wait till you get home.
His mother, with shaky hands, folded the note and put it into her handbag.
How's Fudd?
Simon asked her. Thud was Simon's pet dog.
He's good. I took him out for a long walk today, near the canal. He loved it.
Suddenly, Simon saw a shadowed figure appear out of the corner of his eye. Sharply he turned, but no one was there.
Simon, are you okay?
His mother asked him. But just as he was about to tell her what he saw, Dr. Andrews marched arrogantly into the recreation room and said to everyone, "Can all visitors leave, please? Time's up." Simon's mother looked at her son with a broken heart. Around her eyes she had a smarted red ring from where she had been holding back her tears.
I love you.
She said to him, giving him a kiss on his forehead before leaving the room with tears now rolling down her old, withered face. And as soon as she left, Dr. Andrews walked over to Simon and said to him, "No more misbehaving. Next time you'll be in there for a month."
Where's Curtis?
Simon asked him, ignoring his threat. Dr. Andrews smiled. His eyes were lit up with a type of giddy madness reserved for the criminally insane. Almost like he enjoyed the question, but instead of answering it, he simply said, "Go and get your meds. I'll see you in the morning." Simon watched Dr. Andrews walk out of the room while he thought to himself, "Fuck your meds." Then he thought to himself, "What if I stopped taking them?" That was it. Instantly he started hatching a plan. The plan was to hide the pills under his tongue when they gave them to him at the medicine hatch. He smiled and said to himself,
At least I can get some sleep.
Simon waited in the queue for his medication. He was standing in front of a woman called Sam. Sam always wore baggy hoodies that were at least 5 times her size. This was to hide what she really looked like. She was anorexic, with a long history of other disorders. She'd been at Franklin Medical Center now for 3 years and 1 month. Sam was short, no taller than 4'8", but she was a tearaway. At least once a week she would set the fire alarm off because she knew that the security cameras didn't work, which then made the staff have to get all the patients at Franklin Medical Center out of bed and hurry them out of the building into the garden in single file. However, this certainly wasn't easy. In fact, it was a nightmare. Roger, one of the older patients, would instantly bite the nurses whenever they woke him up, while he shat the bed, screaming at the top of his lungs, "I didn't die for nothing!" Suddenly, Sam turned and said to Simon,
Can you get any booze?
What?
Simon said. He knew what she meant, but he was caught off guard. He'd never spoken to her before because he thought she was trouble, and to be fair to him, he was right.
Booze?
She said again, now slightly pushy in an almost impatient way.
Come on, man. What do you want? Money? Huh? Is that what this is? Okay, I see. Wise guy, huh? Okay, here's what we're gonna do. You're gonna brew me some hooch, and maybe, just maybe, I share it with you.
Simon was taken aback. This was the last thing he needed, but at the same time this little devil had given him an idea. However, he knew that he couldn't get distracted, and furthermore, if he was going to brew some hooch, he certainly wasn't going to share it with her.
No.
He said to her in a blunt tone, not even making eye contact with her.
Cunt.
Simon watched Sam get handed some protein shakes off a nurse at the medical hatch. along with a handful of pills, some green and some red. On her way back to her room, she furiously rammed her shoulder into Simon, trying to knock him off balance. But this only made herself stumble back, like a baby deer, into the wall. Simon chuckled to himself. What a fool, he thought to himself, as he walked over to the hatch while Sam glared at him like she wanted him dead.
Mr. Miller?
Yep, that's me.
The nurse turned around, walked over to a desk that had 2 paper cups on the side, one with the initials CW and one with the initials SM written in black felt tip. She picked up the cup with the initials SM and walked back over to Simon.
Here you go,
She said, waiting for him to take his pills so she could see her next patient. Simon knocked back the pills like he was taking a shot of rum.
Open your mouth.
Simon opened his mouth.
Lift up your tongue.
Simon lifted up his tongue. His mouth was empty. That's how it looked, but in reality, he'd tucked the pills into the side of his mouth.
Thank you. Next.
She called out, ready to serve her next patient. A shimmer of relief washed across Simon's eyes and face. His plan had worked. Chapter 4. That night, Simon managed to untangle some of the thread from the side of his mattress near where he lay his head. He had made a tiny hole no larger than an inch in diameter, which was now his hiding place for his pills. Finally, he could get some sleep, but he would first have to shake off the groggy twitching in his legs from the daytime dose of mood stabilizers. He lay there restless, wondering where Curtis was. Suddenly, a voice started to scratch in Simon's ear. He's dead. Startled, Simon sat up like a meerkat. They killed him, that voice said again, now in an almost distressed, muttering tone. Simon sandwiched his head in between 2 pillows and started whispering to himself.
Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done.
But then a piercing, demonic scream erupted in Simon's ears, making him seize up with fear. He shut his eyes. He could feel something breathing on the back of his neck. Open your eyes, Simon, that voice said, now powerful and loud in an almost crackling, demonic manner. Simon opened one trembling eye. He could see a long, skinny, slender figure towering over him, sitting directly on his chest. Its arms were long and bendy, with fingers like a pit of snakes. Help me! It screeched. Simon tried to move, but he was trapped. He tried calling for help, but his mouth wasn't moving. But then suddenly he woke up, screaming.
Help!
Sitting upright in his bed like he was a zombie rising from the dead. He was drenched in sweat. He looked at the clock on the wall. It was 5 a.m.
Shit. It was just a dream,
he said to himself, almost giddy, with a fear-filled belly of excitement and jitters. Quickly he checked the hole on the side of his mattress to see if he had actually done it or if he'd dreamed it. Thankfully, it was there. He blew a sigh of relief. He'd managed to have a full night's sleep. It didn't feel like that, though. He still felt like he was in a cloudy daze of sticky eyes and fuzzy visions. He hoped it would get better as the day went on, at least. Chapter 5. After breakfast, Simon always went out into the garden for a cigarette. He was down to his last 6 and would have to wait until his mother, Helen, came later that day on a visit, but that wasn't until 6:30 p.m. He hoped that she read the note he gave her as he lit up his first cigarette of the day. He looked out at the garden while he sat on a brittle wooden bench smoking his cigarette. The garden had a path that ran round the outside of it, and in the middle was just an open mass of neatly cut grass, with the odd picnic bench blotted around it, but not next to each other. They were spread separately around the garden, which, in some ways, levitated the level of distrust and anxiety in most of the patients.
Give me one then.
Simon looked up. It was that hellraiser, Sam.
What, after you tried pushing me last night? You really are crazy, aren't you? Just go away.
Sam gritted her teeth. She looked down at Simon. He hadn't even bothered looking up at her. She looked to her left. She could see Roger walking out the door and into the garden. He was wearing his hospital gown and nothing else. He was also clenching onto a pouch of rolling tobacco, like always, and a lighter.
Oi, let's have one then.
But without Roger saying anything at all, Sam was already bounding over to him, ready to take whatever she could. And while Sam was helping herself to Roger's tobacco, Curtis got rolled out into the garden in a wheelchair by one of the nurses. He didn't look like himself, though. Sure, he used to just sit by himself, drawing pictures of insects getting their heads chopped off. But he wasn't like this. Now he was crumpled over, dribbling down his chest and rocking back and forth aggressively. Simon put out his cigarette, quickly lit another one, and started walking over to Curtis. But as soon as the nurse saw that Simon was walking over to Curtis, he bellowed at him. "Step back!" Simon stopped.
Curtis,
He called out from where he was standing.
are you okay?
Curtis didn't respond, and now he was getting carted off around the garden while moaning painfully to himself, rocking back and forth in his chair. Simon took a long drag of his cigarette, which was now halfway down the filter tip. It burned his lips. Swiftly he dropped it on the floor and looked down to see that the cotton filter now had an off, charred coating of a bubbly black, sizzling residue all over it. Slowly he lit another while he walked back over to his bench.
Shit.
He said to himself. Sam was sitting there. He turned to walk the other way, but then she said to him,
Why do you always look like you've been slapped in the face, huh? You miserable looking dickhead.
Why do you always look like you want to cause trouble, Hobbit?
he said to her, instantly wishing he had ignored her. Like a rocket getting shot off into space, Sam sprung to her feet. With vengeance in mind, she stormed over to Simon, getting in his face, and said to him in an aggressive, antagonistic tone,
You don't know me, so don't talk shit like you do, woodpecker.
I know you're an alcoholic.
Fuck you. At least I'm not crazy like you.
Oh, really? Guess you're in the wrong place then. You might as well go home. Oh, wait, you can't, because you're crazy.
Well, at least I don't hear voices like you.
Then suddenly, and without any warning, she stormed off in tears, running back into the disordered comfort of Franklin Medical Center. Puzzled, Simon stood there a moment, scratching his head. He went to go and light up another cigarette, but he only had 3 left, and it was only 8:30 a.m.
Shit. I better go back inside.
Chapter 6. Simon had managed to keep himself occupied up until around lunchtime, when they started giving out the medicine at the medical hatch. This was when he noticed something that made his stomach turn with a disabling intuition of fear and distrust. It was when he was waiting in line, he overheard Dr. Andrews saying that one of the patients, that seemed to be getting better, should have their medication changed immediately. It was a young boy called Alfie. Alfie had been admitted to Franklin Medical Center around a year ago on his 16th birthday. He'd been sent there after setting fire to his bedroom while his family were away on holiday. Luckily, they'd given their neighbor a set of keys so they could feed the cat for them. Fortunately, they found him just as the house was about to be engulfed in flames with him inside. He was convinced that the TV was sending him messages, telling him to do it or his family would be killed. After Simon pretended to swallow his medication, he quickly made his way to the dormitory where his bed was. He wanted to get these pills out of his mouth and into the side of his mattress as soon as possible. He knew if he threw them in the bin and they found it, then they would know it was his. After all, it was his medication, and even if someone was taking the same medication as him, they could still force him to give them a sample of his urine. Otherwise, he'd be given an injection and discarded like a bit of rubbish in a padded cell for weeks on end, with only the shadow people to keep him company. Quickly, he stuck them into the little slit at the side of his mattress before making his way to the recreation room. He knew he had a review of his medication at 2 p.m. with Dr. Andrews, which gave him just enough time to have a cup of coffee and watch a bit of TV. After Simon had made himself a coffee, he slumped down deep in a chair opposite the TV. There was a show on about the conflict in Bosnia in the 90s. Suddenly he saw a flicker of a shadowed figure out of the corner of his eye. He tried to turn to see what it was, but he couldn't. Then a terrifying cackle penetrated through his eardrum like a needle weaving through the threaded sheets. "Join us," it whispered. "We know the truth." Almost having a heart attack, Simon woke up screaming. He looked around. There was a nurse sitting behind him. "Are you okay?" he asked him.
Yeah. What's the time?
Almost 2. You better get to your review with Dr. Andrews. Chapter 7. Simon waited outside Dr. Andrews' office in a narrow corridor near the main reception of Franklin Medical Centre. His eyes were fixated on an oil painting hanging on the wall of a cottage in the middle of the countryside. It reminded him of his grandparents' home in Devon. It was there, as a child, he had his first experience with the shadow people. He remembered it like it was yesterday. He was only 8. He remembered a long, deceased finger scratching away at his face and not being able to do anything about it. But just as he was getting sucked uncomfortably into that burnt, malevolent memory, Dr. Andrews opened the door to his office and said, "Mr. Miller, it's time for your review." Simon stood up. He felt his face droop like one of them dogs with loose skin and droopy, bloodshot eyes. His eyes, to him, felt like they lay blistered and sagged, almost hanging out of his skull. Slowly he plodded to Dr. Andrews' office with a deep desperation to sleep. But he was scared of the shadow people. He sat dreary in a chair opposite Dr. Andrews while the skinny, drawn-in, balding ferret punched buttons into his computer like he was playing a piano. Suddenly he stopped and said to Simon, "So, Mr. Miller, how's everything been since your last outburst?
Fine.
And the hallucinations, have they stopped?"
Yes.
Dr. Andrews paused a moment, somewhat deliberating. He took a sharp sip of his cold black coffee with no sugar and sat back in his chair. Then he frantically started typing something into his computer. Simon didn't know what it was, but whatever it was, Dr. Andrews was punching it into his computer with a smug look creeping into the corners of his paper-thin lips. Abruptly he stopped and said to Simon, "I got told you were sleeping today in the rec room."
Why should that matter?
"I was told you woke up screaming." Simon's breathing became shallow. His lips became pursed to the point of shivering into a pale white colour. Then, without thinking, he said,
Like that? That was just a dream.
"Interesting. I take it the medication is not as strong anymore, yes?"
Well, I guess not.
"We will have to look at increasing the dose then, Mr. Miller. Now, I know you don't like not being able to sleep. Not many people do. But nonetheless, we will have to do what's best for you."
But I'm getting better.
"You woke up screaming, Mr. Miller. I've been doing this job long enough now, and I know what's best. Believe it or not, I want what's best for you."
Like you do for Curtis.
Dr. Andrews paused a moment. He looked like he had a vile taste in his mouth. His lips were tightly pursed into his halitosis-covered teeth, while his eyes flickered with a laser-focused anger that was focused directly on Simon. "Mr. Miller, remember why you're here," he said, now with a smug look painted over his rat-like features. "You could be in prison. You should be grateful. How dare you question my integrity?"
Sorry, I'm not. I don't know why I said that. Must be a lack of sleep.
"Well, make sure it is. Unless, of course, you want to go back in that cell." Simon knew he had to play his cards safe. Otherwise, he'd be making his stay at Franklin Medical Centre that much harder.
Sorry.
He eventually said, rapidly shaking his leg, which caught Dr. Andrews' attention. "Your mother called today, Mr. Miller," Dr. Andrews started to say, making eye contact with Simon. "She said that she won't be able to make it this evening. I'm sorry." Simon's belly flipped upside down, rattling him to the core. His mother was the only glimmer of hope left in his shattered, miserable life.
Why?
"Something about your dog."
What? What about my dog?
"Oh, you know. For the life of me, I can't remember now. Something about taking him to the vet." Simon could feel his face tingle as his heart started to race in his chest like an off-beat set of drums. Then his throat became dry, like a ridged cluster of sandpaper on top of broken shards of glass. "Oh, would you look at the time?" said Dr. Andrews, looking at the clock on the wall. It was 3 p.m. "I have to see another patient now. I'll be sending this report over. Your dose will be up tonight, Mr. Miller."
But what about my dog?
"I'll call your mum and ask her how he's doing. But right now, I have other people to see."
Okay, thanks.
Simon said, standing to his feet and rubbing the sticky, dry crust out of his salty, smarting eyes. Simon didn't have the privilege of calling his mother. In fact, none of the patients had the privilege of making a phone call at Franklin Medical Center. All their phones were locked in a filing cabinet in a small room behind the main reception of the hospital. Simon knew he had to get his phone somehow. After all, his dog, Thud, meant everything to him, and he was more than willing to take a bullet in the brain for him. But as soon as Simon left the room, Dr. Andrews made a phone call. "Mrs. Miller," he said, "sorry, but Simon's asked you not to see him today. I'll call you when he's ready to see you." Chapter 8. At 3:30 p.m. it was arts and crafts for an hour for the patients at Franklin Medical Center in a cold Victorian room on the east wing of the building. Simon always took advantage of this. It was one of the things that made him feel somewhat normal. Unfortunately, Sam had also decided to attend the class that day, and she hadn't left him alone since she got there. In fact, she decided to sit right next to him, and the first thing she asked him for, without saying hello, was a cigarette, and when he said no, it was on to the hooch, like her life depended on it, like she was a sales rep hell-bent on reaching her target, no matter what objections got chucked in her face. In a way, Simon respected her commitment to not go down without a fight.
I'll tell you what I do. If you get something brewing today, I'll make sure you have tobacco in the morning for a week. Sound fair enough?
No, I don't need any. I have my own, thanks.
Today in arts and crafts, everyone was making clay models. They didn't need to make anything particular. They could make what they wanted. This didn't exactly leave much to the imagination for most of the patients, who were on so many downers that the only thing they could seem to do was squash the soggy ball of clay in their hands in an almost soothing motion. One man in his 30s, Patrick, had decided to make a crown of thorns, which he'd wrapped around his head. He was shouting, dribbling, and slightly giddy, telling everyone that he was the baby Jesus.
Why are you in here?
Sam asked Simon. Simon ignored her.
I better know why you're here. I bet you're one of those nutters that killed his own kid.
Oh, yeah? Well, I bet you're one of them mothers that put your baby in the bin because you thought it was the devil, you strange little munchkin.
Sam let out a sarcastic laugh.
Need children to do that, and that I don't. I'm glad too.
But before Simon could say anything, the bell went to let everyone know it was the end of the lesson. Chapter 9. While everyone made their way into the recreation room, Simon went straight to the main reception. He was hell-bent on getting his phone back, so he could call his mother and ask her what had happened to his dog. Furthermore, he wanted to know why she cancelled her visit. Little did he know what was really going on, though. Dr. Andrews was just laying the foundations to his master plan, and what he had in mind was beyond the point of comprehension. It was foul and full of wicked intentions, with a bloodlust that's not for the faint-hearted. It's not even for the strong at heart. It's the sort of acts that should be reserved for the likes of Hitler or Stalin, who now reside in the fire of Hades, tormented by devilish beasts. With flushed cheeks and sweaty palms, Simon slowly approached the long, high-raised desk that stretched out round the main reception, connecting to the offices that were structured with aluminum frames and glass windows that were a slight tint of an aqua blue color. Simon could see Dr. Andrews in the offices talking to one of the women that worked behind the desk at the reception. She, the lady, would greet the visitors among other things, like enrolling the patients into various activities, such as arts and crafts, gym sessions, and group sharing. Group sharing was where the patients could sit in a group of 8 and have an open discussion about their mental state with a junior doctor. She also kept Dr. Andrews up to date with the records and helped him structure his day in regards to what patients he was seeing. But without warning, when Simon was just inches away from the desk, the fire alarm went off, ringing throughout the building like a foghorn.
Fuck.
Simon said to himself as a brigade of heavily jacked nurses steamrolled the lobby like a plane bolting down a runway. Aggressively, one of the nurses snatched Simon off his feet like he was a small, insignificant bit of nothing and was marching him outside to the garden. Chapter 10. In the garden, Sam was howling with laughter. She'd set the fire alarm off once again and loved the attention and control it brought her. Today she loved it especially because it had made one of the patients so anxious that he'd flung his arm in the air like it was leaving his body, straight into Dr. Andrews' hot cup of black, sugarless coffee and into his face, scolding him in the process. Dr. Andrews screamed before yelling at the top of his lungs, pointing at the man who spilt coffee all over him. "Get him now!" Like a tortured pit bull getting let loose on its tormentor, half a dozen Herculean-like nurses dragged the man to the ground before injecting him with that thick, green substance, the same substance they injected Simon with. Simon knew Sam was responsible for all of this, and he hated her for it. After all he wanted to do was call his mother, but now that was definitely not going to happen, not with every single member of staff patrolling the garden like a pack of wild wolves. Then, all of a sudden, Simon heard a scratchy voice whisper in his ear, "It's almost time." Quickly, Simon turned, but no one was there.
Ha! Twitchy or what?
Simon ignored her, even though he didn't want to. Really, he wanted to grab her by the face and stick it down the toilet and use it like a toilet brush in the most destructive, violent of ways. But Sam could tell she was getting to him. The vein on the side of his neck had started to fill rapidly with blood as it became swollen and bold like a giant anaconda, not to mention his face quickly changing colour into a blood-red shade of scarlet red. She smiled before saying to him in a condescending way,
What's wrong? Cat got your tongue, woodpecker?
"Kill her before we kill you." That voice scratched in Simon's ear, now full of venom and hostility. "She thinks you're weak. You have to take her soul." But before Simon could get swept away by this hypnotic voice, like a cobra getting charmed by music, Dr. Andrews called out, "Everyone get back inside." Then, as everyone was walking into Franklin Medical Center, Dr. Andrews grabbed Sam by her arm and said to her in a flat tone, "I know it was you, but I can't prove it. But when I can, believe me, I'll be there to shit on your parade." Chapter 11. Not long after Simon pretended to take his medication, he saw Alfie, the young man that was vastly getting better, get wheeled past him in a wheelchair in a similar state to Curtis. A flutter of anxiety echoed in Simon's mind as he remembered Dr. Andrews insisting Alfie had his medication changed and increased. He knew something wasn't right. He opened his box of cigarettes. He now only had one left, but this was the time he needed it. Quickly he made his way to the garden, hoping no one would be there to bother him with meaningless small talk about the weather, or bumping into the guy that thought he was the devil, or worse, Sam. Luckily, the garden was empty. With his mind wandering into a deep state of distrust for Dr. Andrews, he sat on the wooden bench facing the garden and lit his cigarette. Suddenly a voice whispered to him, "Let us help you." Simon knew that was one of the shadow people.
With what?
He curiously asked them. "Call your mum. She hasn't read the note yet." A flash of worry trickled through Simon's gut like a leaky pipe.
Why not? What about Fudd? Is he okay?
Simon waited for a response, but there was nothing. Then, all of a sudden, he heard a voice that he wished he didn't ever have to hear.
Give me one then.
No.
He abruptly said to her, standing up and walking off in the other direction.
Just leave me alone.
But Sam didn't want to leave him alone.
Why are you so rude?
She said quickly, following him by his side.
Because you set the fire alarm off.
No I didn't.
Yes you did. Everyone knows it was you.
Oh yeah? Well, prove it then, woodpecker.
Oh please, as if I need to.
Well, if you can't prove it, then don't go pointing fingers, you stupid woodpecker.
Just go away and stop calling me woodpecker, you weirdo little fungal infection.
But to Simon's misery, he'd just finished his last cigarette, and now he would have to go without. Begrudgingly, he flicked his cigarette butt onto the grass and made his way inside. But just as he was about to step inside the doors of Franklin Medical Center, he saw Sam, out the corner of his eye, smoking a cigarette. What a little bitch, he thought to himself while debating on whether he should walk over to that pint-sized she-devil and ask her for one.
Fuck it.
He said to himself, walking towards her with one intention. But just as Simon was about to ask Sam for a cigarette, she said to him,
The answer's no, by the way.
You don't even know what I was going to say.
You want a fag? The answer's no.
Simon could feel his fingers itching, with a deep desire to slap Sam's cigarette into her face. It was almost like he had baby piranhas nibbling away at his fingertips.
I wasn't going to ask you for one.
Oh, really? What did you want then, huh?
Simon smiled. Then, without thinking, the word that slipped out of his mouth was
Booze.
Sam's eyes grew wide.
Yeah, what about it?
She said, but Simon didn't really know what to say. Then suddenly it hit him.
I can get you some booze if you give me a cigarette.
Oh, so you do want a fag? Okay, but you better not be lying to me, woodpecker.
But Simon was lying, with no intention of stopping.
I wouldn't lie.
He said to her, holding out his hand for a cigarette. Unfortunately for Simon, Sam wasn't easily fooled.
Okay, but first, you need to tell me what you did to get here.
Instantly, Simon's mouth became dry, like it was layered in cotton, while his pupils dilated into tiny pinheads. He could feel his heart thumping in his throat, making his cotton-covered mouth feel sickly with a distasteful residue.
Why do you want to know that?
Because I don't share my stuff with wrong ends.
Okay, but if I tell you what I did, then you have to tell me what you've done. Is that a deal?
Sam took a long drag of her cigarette, making it crackle as it cascaded down the burning paper trail of thick smoke.
Okay.
She said, blowing a huge cloud of smoke out, which whistled into the air and out of sight.
You first.
Simon paused a moment, but quickly he began telling her all she needed to know.
I took my boss hostage at work.
Why?
Does it matter?
Yeah, it does. What? Were you hearing voices and shit?
Do you?
No, you first.
But I've already told you.
Gotcha.
What do you mean, gotcha? You're not going to tell me now?
Nope.
At least give me my fag.
Ah, okay.
She said, giving him a cigarette with a smile on her face. Quickly, Simon lit it, took a large drag, and blew the smoke out like it was attached to the kingdom of heaven.
Did you really do that to your boss?
Yes. When I give someone my word, I don't go back on it. Unlike you.
Ah, what's the matter, woodpecker? You got what you wanted, so don't be nasty. Plus, if you don't go back on your word, I'll be expecting my hooch tomorrow.
Simon smiled. It was a smile as if to say, she's got you there.
Okay. If you get any visitors, just give me their bank details and I'll send them over 20 quid.
30.
Okay, 30. But you're sharing some with me, and get me some cigarettes too. I'll give you 50, okay? Give your friend this number.
Simon said, quickly scribbling a number down on the back of his empty cigarette box.
It's my mum's number. Give her the bank details and she'll send the money into your friend's account. Ask her how my dog is too, please.
Just then, a racketing bell chimed through the garden like a battleship smashing against the monstrous waves of the deep blue sea, letting everyone know it was time for dinner. Chapter 12. Dinner at Franklin Medical Centre was the equivalent of having dinner at one of Her Majesty's prisons. It was served on a cold plastic tray that had 4 different compartments for the food to go into. One for some sort of greyish egg-smelling meat, one for mashed potatoes that were as thin as full-fat milk, one for gravy that was like water, with jelly-like lumps floating in it, and one for rice pudding, which always had an off scent of decayed milk. Simon, no longer having Curtis to sit and have dinner with, was sitting by himself. The last traces of his medication had slowly sizzled out of his body, and he was now having another intense episode with the shadow people. They were sitting all around him, towering over him, muttering away about how everyone was against him.
You won't break me,
he muttered to them, peering down at his food in which he hadn't touched. But we already have. A distorted, sharp voice shot back. Everything okay, Mr. Miller? In a panicked fluster, Simon turned to see Dr. Andrews standing there, holding a clipboard. His glasses were hanging arrogantly on the tip of his ferret-like nose as he began to talk. I've been watching you, Mr. Miller. I see that dose didn't do anything for you, no? Suddenly one of the slender shadow people rose up like a smoking Lazarus of burnt ash and hell fire, and stood next to Dr. Andrews in an ominous fashion. Slowly it transformed into a rich tar-like smoke and seeped into Dr. Andrews' ear. Then, like a bomb had gone off, Dr. Andrews' head started doing the strangest of things. It turned very quickly into a giant fly's head, a bluebottle to be exact. He had a long, disgusting, slithering snout and giant, red, fiery eyes, and his voice sounded like the hypnotic flapping of a bee. But then, suddenly, one of the male patients screamed, "He didn't count to 6!" Suddenly he stood up and ran towards Dr. Andrews while he screamed at the top of his lungs, "He didn't count to 6!" In a flash, Simon saw a long, slender shadow shoot out of the end of the giant fly's mouth and bounce off the floor like a boomerang around the room. "Get him!" Dr. Andrews orders his staff, now with his normal, aerodynamic, balding head. But it was too late, because the man was now inches away from Dr. Andrews, wailing his arms in the air like a windmill, about to take the crooked doctor's head clean off his shoulders in a violent fit. Luckily, by the devil's grace, one of Dr. Andrews's henchmen was there in the nick of time to save him, elbowing the ill patient in his head like he was trying to smash it to smithereens, or make it explode into a bloody pulp of brains and fractured, jagged skull fragments. But the man didn't stop. Instead, he spun his blood-soaked head round, spraying claret all over the room and onto the patients and staff like a sprinkler, before biting the nurse in a fit of emotional rage on the neck, sinking his teeth deeply into his artery like a vampire that was starved of blood. The nurse screamed desperately for help as the man ripped a large chunk of his neck out before swallowing it whole like a possessed entity from the depths of hell. Suddenly the nurse dropped to his knees and fainted in a ghostly fashion in a puddle of blood on the floor. And while all this was going on, Dr. Andrews slithered away, like the snake he was, before standing cowardly behind his staff and barking orders like he was Napoleon hyped up on cocaine and vodka. Like hypnotized, steroid-abusing robots, the staff quickly followed suit, making a circle around the man like vultures and pushing Simon out of the way. Rapidly they went for him, like a pack of wild dogs, leaving their colleague fitting on the floor while they destroyed the man, breaking every single bone in his body and leaving his face hanging off his skull before injecting him with that same green substance.
I wonder if you're going to help him.
A scared Simon asked them. But like robots, they carted the mentally ill, paralyzed man off like he was an animal about to visit the slaughterhouse. Suddenly the nurse, who had a large chunk of his neck eaten by the mentally ill man, stopped fitting and lay there, with a blank expression painting on his blood-drenched face.
Isn't someone going to help him?
Simon cried, but by now all the staff had vanished. The only people that were left there were the patients, who were now wailing like a pack of ravens, crying up at the night sky. Quickly Simon dropped to his knees and stuck his fingers deep into the nurse's open wound.
Don't shut your eyes. Look at me.
But the nurse was fading fast. Suddenly an open, desolated look washed over his eyes as he lay stiff in Simon's arms.
Somebody help me.
Simon screamed. After what seemed like forever, a group of about 5 nurses quickly ran into the dinner hall and scooped up the nurse Simon was trying to save in their arms. Then, without making any eye contact with anyone, they left, not saying anything to anyone, while their colleague trickled a trail of thick clotted blood like a charcoal river on the floor. Chapter 13. That night, Simon couldn't sleep. He'd snuck his medication into his safety spot, but tonight's events had left his soul blitzed in tormented scars that would never fade away. He lay there with the moonlight flickering through the pale green paper-thin curtains and started imagining what he'd be doing if he was still at home. First of all, he'd be able to see Thud and his mother. Oh, how he longed to see them, especially after what Dr. Andrews had fed him with, that bold, animalistic lie that only the devil would enjoy. And just as he was about to fall asleep, he heard the impaired cry of Curtis wail 5 beds from his right.
Don't let them take you, sire.
Like he'd been struck by lightning, Simon shot out of bed.
What'd you say?
he asked Curtis, walking over to his friend in a cold, paranoid sweat. But Curtis lay stiff once again, with his eyes rolling into the back of his head like he was the Undertaker. Suddenly, a white foam bubbled out of his mouth while he started to have a seizure.
Help! Curtis is having a fit!
Suddenly, he remembered the red emergency button that was near the door on the wall. Like a sniper, he targeted his attention on that, running forward and hitting it before yelling for help again. Then, at that very second, Curtis stopped shaking and lay stiff, with a hollow look washed over his eyes.
Curtis!
Simon yelled, running over to his friend. Curtis wasn't moving, though. His eyes were empty, like whatever life that was in there had vanished.
No. Curtis, wake up. Somebody help him!
Slowly and in the most uncaring of ways, two nurses that looked like they wanted to be anywhere but there sluggishly came strolling in without a care in the world. Callously, they picked up Curtis before shoving Simon out of the way, like they were swatting an insignificant fly. "Get back to bed," they ordered him, walking out the room with Curtis slung over their shoulders like a broken shell of a man. Simon sat there with his knees hugged up tightly against his chest, rocking back and forth, with a golf ball-sized knot swollen precariously in his throat. Slowly, a heavy tear rolled down his cheek and onto the floor as he shut his eyes, muttering the Lord's Prayer to himself in a jittering, repetitive tone. Then, like an ice-cold spirit rising from the temple of the Antichrist, one of the shadow people sat next to Simon, locking its empty eyes upon him in a sinister trance. "He's with us now," it eventually said in a distorted, scratchy voice. Simon looked up.
Fuck you.
He snapped, not showing any sign of fear towards this demonic being. Mind you, he was used to them by now, and in some ways he considered them to be friends. It was almost like a classic case of Stockholm Syndrome.
He's not with you because no one is. You lot are only with me. That's why I'm here, you lanky, in my head prick.
Slowly, the shadowed presence grew taller and taller, almost reaching the ceiling. Suddenly, it methodically bent over, looking right over Simon, and said in a piercing voice, "He's with us." But Simon still hadn't taken his eyes off it. He was looking directly into the hollow soul, trying to convince himself that none of this was real.
You're just in my head,
he said to them. And then, all of a sudden, the lights came on and Dr. Andrews was standing at the entrance of the dormitory. "You need to put what you saw tonight in the back of your mind, Mr. Miller." There was an eerie chill to Dr. Andrews' voice that sent a jolt through Simon's body. "Go to bed," he added, pointing at Simon's bed.
But what about Curtis? Is he dead? What's happened? Please, tell me.
"Mr. Miller," Dr. Andrews impatiently groaned, "go to bed now, unless, of course, you want to go back in that room." Simon didn't say anything. "That's what I thought. Now go back to bed." Rattled to the core, Simon got into bed, with his heart sunk deep to the innards of his gut. Then, with a smug look creeping into the corners of his paper-thin lips, Dr. Andrews flicked the light switch off before leaving the room, slamming the door on his way out. Chapter 14. In the morning, a sleep-deprived Simon made his way into the dinner hall. He was still in a state of panic as he grasped onto his hot cup of coffee, wondering if Curtis was still alive, as he sunk deep into a dreary mist of anxiety and terror. Then, at that very second, one of the male nurses made his way into the dinner hall, only he wasn't alone. He was with Alfie. He was pushing him along in a wheelchair while Alfie's eyes spun around in different directions, almost like they were detached from his soul. Without thinking, Simon walked over to Alfie, but within an instant the nurse stuck his hand out like he was a policeman directing traffic, before ordering Simon, "Don't come any closer." But Simon continued.
Alfie, can you hear me? It's Simon.
"I said move away," the nurse barked in an hypnotic rage, now reaching into his pocket for the potent green injection. Simon put his hands in the air, trying to show he wasn't a threat, before saying to the nurse in a surrendering breath,
It was fine last week. What's he been given?
"This is none of your concern," the nurse shot back in an inferno of indignation. "Now go outside or something. I have to feed him his breakfast." Simon knew that if he carried on, then he would have been twisted up like a ribbon, given an injection, and discarded into that padded cell for weeks on end, with no one to hear his cries.
Okay, sorry.
He eventually said, backing out the dinner hall and making his way outside. When Simon got into the garden, the only thing he could think about was having a cigarette. Isolated, he wandered around the perimeter of the garden, on the cobbled, tiled path, thinking to himself about everything that had been going on. He was certain that Dr. Andrews had poisoned Curtis. Suddenly, a voice called over to him.
"Woodpecker, do you want a ciggy?"
Like a spring jolting up in the air, Simon quickly turned to see Sam sitting on the brittle wooden bench that faced the garden, waving at him to come over. Simon walked over to Sam.
Thanks.
He said to her as she passed him a cigarette and a lighter. Simon lit the cigarette. Then, deliberately and with true intention, he took a long, deep drag and blew a huge cloud of smoke out of his mouth like it was made out of sweet, heavenly nectar.
"You look like shit."
Thanks.
"Sorry, I just mean you look like you haven't slept."
Well, I haven't.
"Any particular reason?"
Simon's pupils dilated. A flash of that horrific memory of Curtis laying stiff in his bed exploded in his mind, making him shake to the core. He could see it now, almost like it was floating out of his body.
"Hey, are you okay?"
No.
He said to her, taking a long, deep drag of his cigarette before forcefully flicking his ash onto the floor. Then, after taking another long, drawn-out drag of his cigarette, he said to her with an abundant layer of rigid anxiety in his breath,
I think something's going on with Dr. Andrews.
"What do you mean by that?"
I think he's poisoning people. Last night, Curtis died, but he said something to me. Something about not letting them take me. Then, he died.
"You sure you weren't imagining things again? No offence, but I've seen you talking to yourself before. I know you see things that aren't really there. Maybe this was the same thing? You know what I'm saying? With Pekka?"
No, this was real. I know it was because
"Because of what?"
I saw the shadow people, but I knew they weren't real. But this was more than real. It's my fault. I went with him that night before they took him.
"Took him? What do you mean, took him?"
I don't know. They put me in one of them padded cells, but I don't know what they did with Curtis. All I know is the next time I saw him, he was in a wheelchair, unable to talk to anyone. Then the other day, I overheard Dr. Andrews saying Alfie needed to have his medication changed and increased. But he seemed like he was getting better.
"I've noticed things too. Last year, before you got here, Dr. Andrews' wife had an affair with one of my friends. He was a patient here. His name was Billy."
Was Billy? As in, he's no longer with us?
Sam looked down to the floor, not making any eye contact with Simon, before saying in a shaky breath,
"He was fine. But then one day, he was taken into one of them padded cells. And after that, he was never the same again. He was in a wheelchair, dribbling all over himself. Then a few weeks later, he just vanished.
Vanished? What do you mean he vanished?
He just wasn't here anymore. Dr. Andrews said that he'd been transferred to a different hospital. But I don't know. I don't know if I believe him."
But while Simon and Sam spoke to one another, Dr. Andrews had been spying on them, peering out of the blinds in his office with one wicked, beady little eye. Slowly a devilish smile crept into the corners of his mouth as he began chuckling to himself in a demented tone. Quickly, he started making a phone call. "Can you fetch Mr. Miller for me? He's in the garden." After he put the phone down, he sat back in his large leather chair and started reading a file that was resting on his large oak desk. It was Simon's file. Then, after a few seconds, he took a red ballpoint pen out of his shirt pocket and started writing something inside Simon's file, with a crazy, laser-focused look embedded in his cold, frosty eyes. What he wrote was malice, with no truth whatsoever, saying that Simon had been violent towards the staff since he'd been at Franklin Medical Center. Then, within a few minutes, there was a knock at Dr. Andrews's door. "Come in," the ferret said, while he rocked back and forth in his chair like he owned the world. Sheepishly, Simon opened Dr. Andrews's door.
You wanted to see me?
"Yes, Mr. Miller. Would you like to take a seat, please?" Simon sat down. "I'm sorry to have to be the one to tell you this, but I'm afraid your mother called this morning, Mr. Miller. She said that your dog has died. I'm so sorry." A piercing pain ripped through Simon's heart like a hurricane, while Dr. Andrews sat back in his chair and analysed him, waiting for him to explode with anger so he could put him in a padded cell. But the explosion wasn't happening. Instead, Simon quietly started to cry, not making any noise or saying anything. "It's okay," the psychopath said, trying to lure him into a false sense of security. "Let it out, Mr. Miller. You're in a safe place." But Simon didn't explode or erupt, giving the evil doctor his way. Instead, he softly said to Dr. Andrews,
What happened to Curtis last night?
"What's that supposed to mean, Mr. Miller?"
Last night I saw you. You told me to go back to bed after they took Curtis away. I just want to know if he's all right. Like, he's still alive, isn't he?
Dr. Andrews' lips tightened into a whitish-yellow colour as he bit his bottom lip, running his tongue over it in a nervous, repetitive fashion. Abruptly he said, "I see the hallucinations are back then, Mr. Miller." Stunned, Simon said,
What? No?
but the conniving Dr. Andrews hastily cut him off, now sharply saying, "Are you suggesting that I'm lying, Mr. Miller?"
No?
Simon said, holding his hands in the air, surrendering to the egotistical threats of Dr. Andrews.
Sorry, I must have dreamt it.
Dr. Andrews had his cold, frosty eyes locked in on Simon like a hawk stalking its prey. Swiftly he dunked the rest of his cold, bitter coffee into his mouth and down his throat like a basketball before saying to Simon in an ice-cold tone, "I think we'll have to look at a different medication for you, Mr. Miller. Perhaps an injection once a week."
No, honestly, I feel much better.
"I'm the judge round here, Mr. Miller, and I think it's for the best. Tomorrow will be your first dose. Now, if you don't mind, Mr. Miller, I've got a lot of work to catch up on." A volcano of anger and chaotic misery erupted in Simon's heart as he glared at the top of Dr. Andrews' balding, carrot-shaped head. Suddenly a sharp voice suggested to him, "Snap his neck. He's the one who killed your dog." Simon gulped. He could feel his fingers curl up into tight knots as he clenched his fists into balls, but then that voice spoke again, now even sharper. "He took him. Snap his neck. Snap his fucking neck." But at that very second, Dr. Andrews looked up at Simon. He glared at him in an offset manner down the rim of his reading glasses before saying, "Do you want anything, Mr. Miller?" A drip of sweat ran from the crown of Simon's hairline all the way down the bridge of his nose and onto the floor.
No?
He muttered, slowly turning and walking towards the door. "May your dog rest in peace, Mr. Miller." The cold, manipulative, sinister quiver of Dr. Andrews' voice trickled in Simon's ear like acid rain just as he got to the door. Simon turned, with the crackling voice of one of the shadow people ringing in his ear, saying to him, "Kill him now. He killed Thud. You must take him." Simon gazed at Dr. Andrews a moment, not saying anything at all. "Got something to say, Mr. Miller?" Dr. Andrews asked, hoping Simon would explode so he could send him into that padded cell.
No?
Simon exhaled in an uncomfortable panic. Quickly he left, shutting the psychopathic doctor's door on the way out. And as soon as Simon left, Dr. Andrews made a phone call. "Mrs. Miller, it's Dr. Andrews. I'm sorry, but Simon said he didn't want to see you today." "No, he didn't say why." "Okay, I'll let him know that his dog misses him. Thank you, Mrs. Miller. I'll do what I can to help. I'll let you know when he wants to see you. Bye." Chapter 15. Burning with fear and panic, Simon paced up and down the corridors of Franklin Medical Center in a mist thick with suicidal thoughts. He knew what that injection was going to do to him, and he would have rather taken his own life than have Dr. Andrews administer his lethal dose of poison, which would have killed him in any case. Suddenly an idea popped into Simon's mind, making him feel slightly giddy, because he knew that if he pulled it off, then he would be free. But instantly that feeling of freedom turned into a debilitating feeling of heartbreak and anguish, because his dog, Thud, sprung into his mind like a deadly cannonball crashing against a ship at sea.
I'm going to miss you, boy,
he said, pulling a picture out of his pocket of the pair of them. The picture was no bigger than an inch by an inch and was slightly faded, but you could still just about make out the pair of them down the park on that snowy day in February.
What you looking at?
Shit, you made me jump.
Can I see?
If you want to. It's just me and my dog down the park, nothing exciting.
I like your dog. He kind of looks like you.
I need your help with something.
With what?
Dr. Andrews said he's changing my medication to injections. I think it's the same stuff that he gave to Curtis and Alfie.
But what do you want me to do about it? I can't stop him.
Yes, you can. The fire alarm. How'd you get away with setting it off all the time?
Because none of the cameras work.
Perfect. You need to set it off at 2 p.m. today.
What's in it for me?
I'll get you your phone back.
Okay, Woodpecker. Fuck it. I'm in. I'm not doing this for you, okay? I'm doing this for me.
I wouldn't have it any other way.
Chapter 16. It was 1 p.m. and Sam and Simon were just about to execute the first stage of their master plan. First of all, Sam was going to distract the lady that worked behind the reception who organised Dr. Andrews' diary. This was because she, the lady, would also have the list that the staff used to mark the patients down on whenever the fire alarm would go off. The plan was to steal the list and mark their names down on it while the woman was distracted before they set the alarm off because, of course, they wouldn't be out in the garden with everyone else. But just as Sam was walking over to the reception, a large man who was wearing a suit cut in front of her, knocking her out the way.
Oi! Watch where you're going.
She said to him, but the man didn't even look at her. He had a blank, emotionless look wiped across his face, and he looked like he was in a hurry. Hello, he said to the woman working behind the desk. I'm here to see Dr. Andrews. Who are you? Asked the woman. His boss, the man said. It's urgent. I wonder what he wants, Sam thought to herself, as she watched this pasty, humongous man in a suit talk to the lady behind the desk to what seemed like forever. She couldn't care less who this man was. She just wanted her phone back, and the more he spoke, the more enraged it made her. She started visualizing herself stabbing the man violently in the neck until he dropped to the floor in a pool of blood. But before Sam's thoughts could take her into a deep pit of chaos and darkness, Dr. Andrews tensely nudged past her and said to the man in the suit in a shaky, nervous voice, Dr. Blackman, thanks for coming. Instantly Sam could feel the tension seeping off Dr. Andrews like a bad smell. Has he been found out? She thought to herself, watching the pair of them walk down the narrow corridor and into Dr. Andrews' office. And it was then Simon opened the double doors that led into the main lobby of Franklin Medical Center from the belly of the west wing of the hospital. He thought Sam would be done by now, and it would be his cue to swiftly take the paperwork without being seen. But quickly Sam walked over to Simon, mouthing the word,
Sorry.
before she brushed past him and walked back into the main body of the hospital. Confused, Simon swiftly turned and started following her.
What just happened?
Get off me.
She said to him, pulling her arm away, but as she did, her sleeve on the baggy hoodie got pulled all the way up, revealing her scarred, covered arm. Immediately she pulled her sleeve down and ran up the corridor and was out of sight in a matter of seconds.
Sorry,
Simon called out, but it was too late. Then, after a few seconds, the fire alarm went off, sending a buzzing, racketing echo down the corridor.
Shit, we haven't even put our names down yet.
But Simon didn't have any time for Plan B because, at that exact moment, a monster of a nurse picked him up and was marching him down the corridor like he was a little baby. Chapter 17. Simon got slung into the garden like he was a bit of rubbish getting flung into a skip of rubble. He turned to see a line of patients getting marched out of the hospital, along with a cascade of others getting javelined into the garden like they weren't even good enough to be called animals. He sat on the floor for a moment, waiting for Sam to be marched out, but the more he waited, the more concerned he grew that she was using this opportunity to get her phone back and leave the hospital without him. Deep down, he didn't want her to get caught and turned into a zombie along with Alfie and Curtis, but at the same time, he couldn't believe that he trusted her with his plan. Then, like some sort of pompous, sleep-deprived ferret that's in charge of planet Earth, Dr. Andrews emerged at the doors that backed onto the garden. He was standing with Dr. Blackman and, to Simon at least, the pair of them had some sort of off-tempo about them, like they knew something no one else knew and they weren't willing to tell anyone about it. Leisurely and somewhat carelessly, they walked past Simon as he lay on the floor, while they spoke about the patients at the hospital. "I think it's that girl I was telling you about." "You think? Dr. Andrews, please tell me you got the cameras fixed." "Sorry, sir, not yet." Simon could see the colour on Dr. Blackman's pasty cottage cheese-like skin turn into a scarlet shade of fiery red. "Why not?" Dr. Blackman snapped. "They were meant to come out last week. I've been trying to get hold of them, but they're not picking up the phone. Maybe you could call them, sir. After all, people listen to you." What a slimy rat, Simon thought to himself, listening to Dr. Andrews brown-nosing Dr. Blackman with zero shame. But suddenly Simon caught Dr. Andrews's attention out the corner of his beady little eyes. "Mr. Miller, get up and get in line with everyone else," he barked, pointing at Simon, who was still laying on the floor. Simon got up and walked over to the line of people who were standing at the side of the north wing of Franklin Medical Center and stood next to them. With owl-like eyes, he scoped the premises, looking for Sam, but she was still nowhere to be seen. Suddenly, he saw the nurse that was marking everyone's name down on the paperwork that Simon was meant to steal walk over to Dr. Andrews. Intently, he tried listening to what they were saying, but he couldn't hear anything. But then, all of a sudden, Sam appeared at the doors that connected to the west wing of the hospital that backed onto the garden. She yawned like she'd just woken up, and this was a big inconvenience to her as she stepped into the garden and made her way over to the line of people standing at the north wing of the hospital. Simon looked over at the nurse that was marking everyone down on the list as he acknowledged Sam's arrival. But at that very second, Dr. Andrews started marching over to Sam with purpose. "Miss Brown," he aggressively barked at her, getting in her face, "where have you been? Did you do this?" Calmly, Sam looked at Dr. Blackman and said to him,
Can you tell your number two that he needs to look at his cameras before he starts chucking around accusations?
She was right, and this certainly left a vile, putrid taste in Dr. Andrews' mouth. The evil doctor could feel Dr. Blackman staring a hole right through the side of his aerodynamic, balding head. It was making him shiver and shake with the worry of losing his job, or worse, getting an investigation summoned on his contribution of work since he'd been in charge of Franklin Medical Center. He knew if that happened, then he would be going straight to jail with no chance of an early release. "I'm going to call someone now," he said to Dr. Blackman in a cowardly tone of breath. "Make sure you do, because we have a lot to talk about," Dr. Blackman sternly said. "Now, before we leave, is everyone here?" "Yes," Dr. Andrews said, hanging his head. But then, out of nowhere, Roger started screaming, saying that Dr. Andrews had been poisoning people before unexpectedly jolting his old, bony frame at Dr. Blackman like he was about to kill him. Instantly, Dr. Blackman barked, "Staff, on that man now! Take him down!" In a matter of seconds, a nurse pulled a syringe out of his belt like he was a gunslinger before jabbing Roger in the neck with that thick, green substance, making him fall to the floor in a heap. Simon looked at Sam. Sam looked straight ahead, not making any eye contact with him whatsoever. "Sometimes I forget the stress you're under, Dr. Andrews," Dr. Blackman said to the balding ferret as he watched the nurses cart Roger off into the building and out of sight. "Don't worry, I know you're a man of integrity. I remember what you done for me and Melissa. Sorry, I've been hard on you today. It's not you, it's me. Can you get the patients back inside the building, please? I need to speak to you about a few things. But don't worry, you're certainly not in any trouble. Chapter 18. Not long after hiding his medication, Simon started getting paranoid. The pile of unwanted pills were building rapidly in his mattress, and he knew he had to get rid of them. He thought about flushing everything down the toilet, but you need a nurse with you at all times when you went there, just in case you tried killing yourself. It had happened before, and Dr. Andrews certainly wasn't willing to have blatant, neglected blood tainted all over his conniving, sociopathic hands. At the same time, however, he was desperate to find Sam. He wanted to know what she had done when everyone else was outside. So, stuck in between a rock and a hard place, he started on his first task, finding Sam. Quickly he made his way into the recreation room, but she wasn't there. Then a feeling soaked his belly, making him believe that Sam was on the other side of Franklin Medical Center in the south wing, in the girls' dormitory. He knew he wasn't allowed there, though. Otherwise he would have been twisted up like a shoelace, given an injection, and sent straight into that padded cell. Then, like a time bomb waiting to go off, Alfie got rolled into the recreation room in a wheelchair, looking like he was about to die. He was taking sharp, shallow breaths in while he lay rigid, almost as still as a statue, with an off-white coating layering his skin like a sheet of aging, withered paper.
Alfie, are you okay?
Simon desperately asked him, but he was abruptly cut off by a nurse that resembled a rhino barking at him in an antagonistic tone. "Stay away from him!" Slowly Simon took 2 steps back, not breaking eye contact with the nurse. Then, in a drawn-out, painful, agonizing tone, Alfie screamed, "Help me!" "Don't listen to him. Just get out of here," the nurse snapped at Simon, who now had a ghostly look splattered across his face in an ink made out of fear and injustice. Lowering his head and not looking at anyone, Simon immediately left the room. He had to find Sam fast, or he knew for a fact he'd be turned into a zombie like his friends. In a hurried state of paranoia, he started walking over to the girls' dormitory. But suddenly he stopped.
I can't go in there. If I get seen, I'll get put straight into that padded cell.
He stood, short of breath a moment, wondering if she would be in the garden. But when he got to the garden, Sam was nowhere to be seen. Abruptly, a voice in Simon's ear said to him, "You have to kill him before he kills you." Simon pondered on that wicked suggestion for a moment. He knew what they were telling him was the truth. After all, it was either Dr. Andrews or him, and he would have rather spent his days in solitary confinement with the shadow people than get poisoned by a man that looked like a balding, middle-aged ferret. So with that in mind, he made his way over to Dr. Andrews' office immediately. His mind was now twisted over the point of snapping as he opened the heavy iron doors that backed onto the garden. "We want the best for you, Simon," one of them said as it manifested in front of him in a long, ominous shape. Simon smiled with a blank gaze in his eyes before saying to his imaginary friend,
I know.
and it was with that Simon slowly started plodding to Dr. Andrews' office in a somewhat methodical way, not looking at anyone, as he got led down a path of death and revenge by his shadowed brethren. But as soon as he stepped foot in the lobby that connected to the narrow corridor in which Dr. Andrews' office was located, Sam was already there, and the moment she saw Simon, with a type of look on his face that she had never seen before, she knew something was wrong.
Simon,
She called out, waving at him to come over. Like turning on a light, something clicked in Simon's mind the moment he heard Sam's voice.
Sam, where am I?
He asked her, with a look of confusion embedded in his eyes. Quickly Sam walked over to Simon, held his hand, and started walking with him back into the belly of Franklin Medical Center.
have you taken something?
No. What just happened? I was just in the garden then. I don't know. I don't know how I got here.
You look like you were about to kill someone. Are your meds not working or something?
Simon hadn't told anyone that he wasn't taking his medication anymore, and he wasn't planning on telling anyone either.
What would that matter? Tomorrow I'm going to become a vegetable anyway, so what's the point?
So is that a yes or a no?
Does it matter? Besides, where did you go earlier, huh?
To get this?
Sam said, showing Simon her mobile phone.
Great, but how are we supposed to get out? If we go, they'll know we've left, now we haven't put our names down on that twat's paperwork.
Does it matter?
Simon paused a moment, calculating the task that lay ahead. Then, after a few seconds, he said,
How do you want to do it then? Do you want to call the police, or do you want to escape?
As if the police would believe us. A couple of crackpot Looney Tunes.
What time did you want to leave?
How about now?
Suddenly, the squeaky voice of Dr. Andrews echoed up the corridor, sending a paranoid blitz of agony up Simon's spine and into his brain. Mr. Miller, I need to see you in my office at once. Then, like a planned execution, several muscle-bound nurses walked out of the doors that were just in front of Simon and Sam, blocking them both into a tight gap. Suddenly, they grabbed Simon, pushed Sam out the way, and were marching him to Dr. Andrews' office with malicious intentions. Chapter 19. As soon as Simon got forced into a chair by a Goliath of a nurse in Dr. Andrews' office, Dr. Andrews gradually poured all of the pills that Simon had been hiding in his mattress onto his pretentious giant oak desk. You have some explaining to do, Mr. Miller. Simon didn't know what to say, looking at the long list of medication spread out over Dr. Andrews' desk. It was safe to say he'd been caught red-handed and there was no way of getting out. Dr. Blackman suggested that I do a search of everyone's room today, and I'm glad I did. After all, look what I've found. It explains so much. The way you've been acting, the mood swings, talking to yourself throughout the day. Now it makes sense. Nurse, now please. But before Simon could do anything, the nurse pulled out an injection from his pocket, only it wasn't the thick green substance used to render people in a paralyzed state. Oh no, this was a clear liquid, and before Simon had a chance to do anything at all, the nurse injected that clear substance directly into the artery running up the side of his neck. Instantly Simon felt a warm sensation gather round his gullet and down his spine, but he didn't fall to the floor like a crumbling building. This will make you better, Mr. Miller, said Dr. Andrews. You won't have to pick any medication up after dinner. This will have to be the point of action moving forward. Now, if you don't mind, I have a lot of work to catch up on. And before Simon knew it, he got hoisted up from under his arms and was getting marched out of Dr. Andrews' office, more confused than he'd ever been in his life. But then it hit him. This wasn't that same green injection they forced upon him the last time they violated him. Oh no, this was a different one. Maybe it's the one they were going to give me tomorrow, he thought to himself. The one they gave to Curtis and to Alfie. But he couldn't for the life of him understand why he wasn't turning into a vegetable. Suddenly, a sickening thought hit him like a ton of bricks. What if it's a slow-release drug? Chapter 20. After getting flung into the lobby by the nurse, Simon only had one thing in mind, looking for Sam. He was desperate to call his mother and tell her that he had been poisoned by this crazy ferret of a man. Furthermore, he wanted to find out what had happened to his dog, Thud.
You have to kill him.
A creepy, haggard voice suggested in his ear.
He's a liar, a no-good liar.
Simon was at a point where these distorted suggestions were making all the sense in the world. He thought for sure he was going to die in the next couple of days anyway, and there was nothing he could do about it. Then he started thinking about his mother. What would she say if he killed Dr. Andrews? If there was one thing he did know, however, it was the fact that he had to find out what he'd been injected with before it was too late. With that, he made his way to the garden, hoping that Sam would be there. Luckily, when Simon got to the garden, Sam was already there, sitting on the brittle wooden bench, facing the garden, having a cigarette. And the moment she saw Simon, she stood up and started walking over to him.
Are you okay? What did they say? I thought they gave you an injection and you'd be in that padded cell.
They gave me an injection. I think it's the same one they gave to Curtis and Alfie. I need to get out of here. I need to get to a hospital.
Wait, slow down. What do you mean they gave you an injection? You seem fine.
I don't know. I think it's slow release.
Shit. Okay then, Woodpecker. What's the plan?
I need to use your phone.
Okay, but where? There's nurses all over the place.
There's a vent in the art room. If we get a ladder or something, we can climb up it.
Do you know where it leads to?
I think it leads to the laundry room. From there, we can hide until it's safe to sneak out.
Okay, lead the way.
Chapter 21. The journey to the arts and crafts room took Sam and Simon around 5 minutes. Luckily, no one spoke to them on their way there, but as soon as they were about to open the door to the arts and crafts room, one of the junior doctors, Dr. Spider, who looked like a burnt lizard, called out to them, "Stop!" He was up the other end of the corridor with a chocolate brownie in one hand and a takeaway cup of coffee in the other. Like an out-of-shape, sunburnt reptile, he came puffing and panting up the corridor after them, with the intention of stopping whatever it was they were doing. But Simon was already laying down bricks, covering his tracks, and sculpting the foundations of his master plan like a man with nothing to lose.
Why? This is the gym class, right?
No. Come with me. I'll show you where to go. But on the walk to the gym, Simon could feel the effects of this medicine starting to creep in like an unwanted, cancerous guest. Luckily, it was extremely subtle, only a slight tingling in the tips of his fingers at this point, but he knew that he would have to put it in the back of his mind for now. After all, he wasn't going to let anything stop him until his last breath, and only then he would have considered that a death worthy of this insanity. Eventually, they made it to the gym, but it wasn't open.
Thanks. The class starts soon. We'll wait here.
Dr. Spider took a slurping sip of his hot cup of coffee before saying, "That's okay." Then he left, not asking any more questions, which he would later regret. And it was only after they knew no one was listening, Sam asked Simon,
Great. So now what? We go to the gym and work out? Fuck that.
No. Look in there and tell me what you see.
Sam looked through the pane of glass that was in the centre of the gym door, but she didn't know exactly what she was looking at.
Weights and a bunch of other shit. What's that got to do with anything?
No, not that. The laundry baskets. We can hide in them. They get taken to the laundry room today. Plus, if we get in the gym now while no one's in there, I can call my mum.
How?
Give me your hair clip.
Sam gave Simon her hair clip. Simon looked left to right. Then, after a few seconds, he started tampering with the lock, clicking it back and forth in a rhythmic motion. Suddenly there was a loud click as the door slowly became ajar.
Quick, right, give me your phone.
Sam gave Simon her phone. Simon tried calling his mum's home, but she wasn't answering. Quickly he tried calling her mobile, but then the clattering of footsteps started chiming down the corridor like a brigade of horses.
Hide.
Simon said to Sam. Without thinking, Simon took Sam's hand, ran over to a large laundry basket with a lid on top of it, and jumped inside it with her before shutting the lid. Then, at the very second, the door got flung open as a cascade of patients came flooding into the room like an excited wave, hitting the shoreline and sucking everything back into the sea. But all Simon and Sam could see was darkness as the volume in the gym became somewhat chaotic. Suddenly a voice spoke, saying, "Everyone calm down." It was the man who ran the gym sessions. He wasn't a nurse, but he was certainly on Dr. Andrews' team. As a matter of fact, he would do anything for the twisted doctor. On the account, Dr. Andrew had helped him and his wife start a GoFundMe account, which helped her pay for her cancer treatment. Little did they know, however, this was all part of the mad doctor's plan. To look like he was a caring, loving man, but really, deep down in his soul, he was a sociopathic maniac. "Now, today, we are going to take it nice and easy, okay? Nothing crazy." But this was the wrong thing to say. "Who you calling crazy, buddy, huh?" one of the patients snapped, flapping his arms in the air like he was about to take off. "You think I'm crazy? Is that what you're trying to say, Mr. Perfect?" "Sir, please calm down. No one thinks you're crazy," the gym instructor continued. But it was too late, because the man was now screaming at the top of his lungs, You won't intimidate me. You're not my dad, dickface. Slightly worried, the gym instructor blew his whistle, and then, not long after that, a unit of steroid-abusing, refrigerator-shaped nurses came steaming into the gym. Swiftly and violently, they steamrolled the man, injecting him in front of everyone with that thick, green substance. But Sam and Simon couldn't see a thing. Sam wanted to, though. She was trembling with a deep desire to peek out the lid so she could see what was going on. Impulsively, she set upon that task, opening the lid slightly and peering out. But before she had a chance to really see what was going on, Simon pulled her back.
What the fuck are you doing?
He asked her. Abruptly, the lid opened, right there and then, but Sam and Simon were hidden under the covers. Luckily, it was only some old washing that got chucked over them before the lid got slammed shut.
Shit, that was close.
You think?
Simon sarcastically muttered. But then, all of a sudden, the cart they were in started moving. Simon lightly put his hand over Sam's mouth as she lay on top of him and whispered to her.
Don't say anything.
Eventually, after what seemed like forever, the cart came to a stop. Then, in the muffled distance, they heard someone say, "That's it for the night, lock up. We'll sort it out in the morning, 5 a.m. sharp, all right? No excuses like last time." "Okay, boss, whatever you say." Then there were footsteps, followed by the door closing. Then there was nothing, not a single sound.
I think we've done it.
Simon whispered, slowly peeking out the lid to see if the coast was clear. It was clear. Quickly he stood up, helping Sam to her feet at the same time.
We've done it.
He said to her, as the pair stood inches away from one another, looking into each other's eyes. But at that exact second, the door started to unlock. Immediately, Simon and Sam dunked themselves under the pile of unwashed clothes and bedsheets, while Dr. Andrews came strolling into the room before shutting the door behind himself. He stood there a moment, looking at the laundry cart Simon and Sam were hiding in. The lid on it was still open. At a snail's pace, he walked over to the laundry cart and looked inside it, but unfortunately, all he could see was the dirty washing. Swiftly, he closed the lid and started making a phone call. "Hello, it's me again. Yeah, I'm going to need a few more liters, at least 10. How much? Jesus, since when did LSD become so expensive? Right, sure. I'll see you in a bit. Yep, bye." Why does he want that much LSD? Simon thought to himself, intensely listening to Dr. Andrews' footsteps until they faded out the room. Then, after the door shut, Sam asked Simon,
Do you think it's safe to come out?
Just wait a minute. Oh, give me your phone.
Sam gave Simon her phone, but there was one problem.
Fucking hell. It's dead.
Shit. What are we going to do?
Let's get out of here. We should be safe for the rest of the night.
Simon opened the lid and let Sam get out first. And while Simon was clambering out of the cluttered cart, Sam asked him,
So how do you feel after, the injection?
Fine. Don't worry about me.
I'm not.
After an uncomfortable pause, Simon started searching the room.
What are you looking for?
Something I can make a charger out of.
Sam started helping Simon, even though she didn't know what she was looking for.
What do you need?
A wire
He said, reaching over the back of an industrial washing machine.
and some tin foil.
He added, pulling out one of the cables.
What do you think he wants all that LSD for?
Fuck knows. Can you just try and find, like, a knife or a pair of scissors or something?
Sure, no problem.
Sam said, as she started searching along the metal shelves that had piles upon piles of dirty bedsheets slung over it in a massive, unkept heap. Suddenly, Simon's legs started filling with pins and needles. Then, within a blink of an eye, they became numb as he collapsed on the floor.
Simon, are you okay?
But Simon couldn't move. In fact, he couldn't even speak. He was now wrapped up in the devil's cocoon, and the only thing he could do was blink and breathe.
Shit. God, Simon, you weigh a ton.
She strained, propping him up against some dirty trousers and shirts that were mixed in with a few crumpled towels.
Simon, hang in there. I'm going to get you out of here, okay?
Chapter 22. There was a reason Simon couldn't get hold of his mother that day, and that was because she was already out the house and on her way to Franklin Medical Center with one thing in mind: seeing if her son was safe. After all, she knew in her heart of hearts that Simon wouldn't stop her from seeing him, especially after reading his note. Her cheeks were flustered when she parked her car that cold November day. She had decided to wrap up warm, though. She was wearing a scarf, mittens, a woolly hat, and a long thermal coat that went all the way down to her knees. And as she stepped out the car, she took in a deep breath and blew out a cloud of steam into the cold, frost-bitten air. Gradually she made her way over to the main doors of Franklin Medical Center, with her heart flapping in her chest like a hummingbird. Then, with ice-cold fingers, she rang the bell and waited for someone to answer. "Can I help you?" a muffled voice asked her through the intercom.
Yes, I'm here to see my son Simon.
"What's his last name?"
Miller.
"Okay, come in," the voice said, buzzing her in. But just as Simon's mum was entering Franklin Medical Center, Dr. Andrews drove into the car park in his new Mercedes just in time to see her walk into the building. He had just been to see the man that supplied him with LSD, and he had brought a considerable amount off him. Instantaneously, a wicked idea popped into his evil mind as he looked at the bottles of potent psychedelics resting in his passenger seat. Then, like a rat scavenging for food, he scooped up every single bottle, put it into a duffel bag, opened his car door, and made his way to the front doors of Franklin Medical Center. And as soon as he got into the building, he went hunting for Mrs. Miller like she was his evening supper. He was licking his paper-thin, halitosis-covered lips, salivating with what was about to happen once he got his sociopathic hands on her. Like an army major, he came marching into the lobby to find the small, timid Mrs. Miller sitting on a chair, waiting to see her son. "Mrs. Miller," Dr. Andrews said, like he was her best friend. "So nice of you to come over, but I'm afraid Simon still doesn't want to see you. He's very ill, but maybe we can talk about him in my office, yes?" Mrs. Miller was giving Dr. Andrews the most untrusting scouring of looks, but at the same time he was a doctor, supposedly the most trustworthy persons in society. So, as you could imagine, it was with a reluctant heart she stood up and followed the evil doctor into his office, so she could find out more about this note Simon had written to her. Upon entering Dr. Andrews' office, the psychotic doctor started saying, like butter wouldn't melt in his mouth, "Please take a seat, Mrs. Miller. Oh, and let me take your coat. And would you care for a cup of tea?"
Yes, and yes.
Mrs. Miller said, passing Dr. Andrews her coat. "Very well, Mrs. Miller," he said, hanging her coat onto the back of his door. "I won't be long." But what Simon's mum didn't know was that Dr. Andrews was planning on spiking her drink with an ample amount of LSD, which he knew for a fact would send her into a wild animalistic frenzy, just so he could give her an injection and send her into that cold, padded cell like a forgotten toy. And while Dr. Andrews was making Mrs. Miller a tainted cup of psychosis tea, Mrs. Miller took the note out of her bag that Simon wrote and started quietly reading it to herself.
They gave me an injection and put me in a cell like an animal, Mum. And I think they've done something to my friend Curtis. But I don't know what.
Suddenly the door opened and Dr. Andrews came walking in, pushing a trolley with 2 cups of tea on it, with a ludicrous, over-the-top smile on his face. "Sugar, Mrs. Miller?" he asked her.
No, thank you.
With a crooked smile, he passed Simon's mum a cup of tea before sitting behind his giant oak desk. Simon's mum blew on her steaming hot cup of tea. Then, just before she was about to take a sip, she said to Dr. Andrews,
Simon wrote this.
She was talking about the note he wrote. She had it held out for Dr. Andrews to have a look at. Sparked with curiosity, Dr. Andrews took the note off Mrs. Miller and started reading it. But being the snake he was, he simply said, "Yes, Simon has been having intense delusions recently. That's why you haven't been able to see him. I'm afraid he's getting worse. Much worse, in fact, so much so we've had to move him to a different part of the hospital."
Oh no. I thought he was getting better.
He was. That's the tragic thing about mental health, Mrs. Miller. It always manages to rear its ugly head. How's the tea, by the way? I hope it's not too milky for you,
Oh no, dear. It's fine.
she said, taking a large sip of LSD. A spark of evil washed across Dr. Andrews' eyes as he asked Mrs. Miller, "Do you mind if I put the radio on in the background?"
No.
But the radio station Dr. Andrews put on wasn't your typical radio show. Oh no, it was actually a recording with subliminal messages sprinkled all over it. The messages were very simple and direct, telling the listener that everyone wanted to steal their blood and that all eyes were on them. Dr. Andrews had made several recordings. His favorite one was the one he manufactured for his staff. He would microdose every single one of them each morning before work. Then at lunchtime he would give them another little sprinkle in their tea or coffee while he manipulated their subconscious mind with his pre-recorded tape, which was swollen with morbid suggestions of power and control. And while his sickening recording played in the background, Dr. Andrews said to Mrs. Miller, "You know, Mrs. Miller, Simon's condition is hereditary." But before Mrs. Miller could say anything, Dr. Andrews' office phone started to ring. "Excuse me, Mrs. Miller," he said as he picked up the phone. "Hello? Oh, really? Okay, I'm coming now." Dr. Andrews put the phone down. "Sorry, Mrs. Miller, I hope you don't mind, but I have something I need to do. I won't be long." Dr. Andrews left Mrs. Miller alone with the radio playing in the background, but what he didn't tell her was the fact that Simon was now missing. Chapter 23. Back in the laundry room, Simon was still in a paralyzed state. Sam had been doing her best to try and snap him out of it, but there was nothing she could do. She knew she had to think fast, though.
Simon, wait there,
she said to him. Sam started searching the room for a way out. She started by walking around the perimeter of the room in hope she could find a door, but the only door that was there was the one they came in through, and that led straight into Franklin Medical Center. She stood there a moment with sweaty palms, anxiously thinking of a way out. She thought about using the vent, but she didn't exactly know where it led to. Plus, she knew that she wouldn't have been able to lift Simon up and take him with her. He was just far too heavy for her. With a panic deeply settling into her soul, she started walking back over to Simon. But as she was walking, she stepped onto a large plank of wood that sunk slightly in. She looked down and noticed that this part of the floor looked different. The wood was a different color to the rest of the floor. Suddenly she noticed a long grey string that was looped around one of the planks of wood she was standing on. Curiously, she bent down and pulled it as hard as she could, revealing a trap door that had an old wooden staircase leading into a darkened room that smelt like mold and damp.
Simon, I found a way out, I think.
With that, she rushed over to Simon and started trying to pick him up, but he was far too heavy for her.
Shit,
she said. And then, all of a sudden, she could hear footsteps from outside in the corridor, getting closer and closer to the laundry room. Sam started to panic. Quickly, she looked round the room, suddenly noticing a trolley in the corner of the room that was almost at ground level. It was the sort people use to put wooden pallets on. Rapidly, she sprung to her feet, grabbed the trolley, and started rolling Simon's body onto it. But then the door slowly started to open. In a flash, Sam pushed Simon towards the trap door as fast as she could before jumping on the trolley with him. Then, just as the laundry room door was opening, she used the trolley like a bobsled, making sure she shut the door as they disappeared down into the darkened room. And it was Dr. Spider who opened the door. He stood there a moment before stepping into the room, sweating nervous bullets. He knew that all of this was his fault. Quickly, he started searching the laundry trolleys, but of course, he couldn't find anyone. "They can't have gone far," he said to himself, walking out the door and shutting it on his way out. Chapter 24. It was a violent one-way crash for Sam and Simon as they came tumbling down the steps. Both of them had broken bones. Simon had broken his arm and Sam had broken her leg. She tried standing up, but collapsed in an ample amount of pain, screaming wild obscenities. But then a voice in the darkness said,
"Sam, is that you?"
Sam knew that voice. It was Billy, the man who had had the affair with Dr. Andrews' wife.
Billy, is that you?
"Yeah, I'm over here."
I can't move. I think I broke my leg. Can you help me?
"I can't. I'm tied up on my hands and legs."
Shit. Okay, I'm coming.
Painfully, Sam started dragging her broken body across the floor in the direction Billy's voice was coming from. Suddenly, she felt a large wooden table leg.
Billy, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
He said to her. With that, Sam grasped onto the top of the table and hoisted herself up. Whilst leaning on her good leg, she fumbled round the table in the darkness, cutting herself with a sharp knife before finding a torch. Quickly she turned it on and saw Billy strapped to a table by his hands and feet, stretched out like an elastic band with jagged slice marks across his face and chest. He was only wearing a pair of trousers that appeared to be soaked in his own blood.
Help me,
He desperately said to her. With a sharp, shooting, agonizing pain erupting inside her leg, Sam picked up the knife and hopped over to the tortured table Billy was strapped to and started cutting him free. But just then there was a moaning coming from the other side of the room.
help me, please, help me. That's Curtis. Don't worry, give me the knife. I'll set him free.
Sam gave Billy the knife. Billy walked over to Curtis and started cutting him free, removing the rope that was tied around his legs and arms with the knife.
How long have you both been down here?
As soon as I got moved out the hospital, he gave both of us this injection that almost killed us. Then when we were at our worst, almost at the point of death, he took us down here.
Who else knows you're here?
No one. Dr. Andrews told everyone that he transferred us to a different hospital. He's even manipulated our medical records so it looks that way, the piece of shit. But that ain't even the half of it. He's even put soundproofing all round the room so he can come down here at night and do what he's been doing to us.
Is there a phone charger down here? I need to call the police.
Curtis laughed.
They won't believe us, love. We're the criminally insane. They'll think we're lying.
Not if we don't say who we are. Plus, I've got something on him besides this shit. Me and Simon heard him talking on the phone, ordering shit ton of LSD. We can get the police here today.
But then, at that very second, a piercing clunk erupted as the trapdoor opened, making a beam of light flood through the darkened room like a blanket of terror.
Hide.
Billy urgently whispered, but it was too late, because now Dr. Andrews was walking down the steps into his personal torture chamber like the second coming of Hitler. And as soon as the evil doctor took his first step into the room, something inside Billy snapped. Instantly he ran at the evil doctor, looking to take him clean off his feet, but Dr. Andrews sprayed him in the eyes with pepper spray, making Billy fall to the floor, screaming in pain. "All of you misfits really thought you could outsmart me?" Dr. Andrews chuckled. "A bunch of imbeciles, outcasts, those who society wants rid of. This won't go unpunished. Oh no." But as Dr. Andrews was antagonizing everyone with his sociopathic patter, Curtis quickly snatched the knife that Billy used to free him with and was running towards Dr. Andrews with his eyes shut, flinging the knife around like a madman. Urgently, Dr. Andrews quickly stepped back, narrowly avoiding Curtis, who swung the knife dangerously close to his neck. Then, with one careless swing, Curtis misplaced his feet and plummeted on top of Simon, stabbing him in the stomach in the process. Curtis opened his eyes and saw what he had done. He cried,
No, Simon!
but as he did, Dr. Andrews hit him over the head with a large metal pipe that was placed near the bottom of the stairs. "It appears that you've done my work for me," Dr. Andrews said mockingly to Curtis. Simon coughed, spewing a river of blood out his mouth and onto the floor as his eyes rolled into the back of his skull. Suddenly, Dr. Andrews locked eyes with Sam, who was still clutching onto the table, resting on one leg. With malice intentions, he walked over to her with the metal pipe in his hands. Then, with one big swipe, he hit her in the leg, which made a horrific cracking sound as she fell to the floor, screaming in agony. Then, like a demon twisted with power, Dr. Andrews bent over and whispered in Sam's ear, "Seems I caught you in the end, Miss Brown." But then Sam saw Dr. Andrews' face change from a demented smile into a faded, far-off look. Then she looked at his throat. It had been sliced. Suddenly he dropped to the floor and started bleeding profusely while he choked on his own blood. Sam looked up and saw Billy standing above Dr. Andrews, holding onto the knife while he shook with anger.
It's okay, Billy. It was either him or us.
Call the police. I don't care. It's not like I was ever going to come out of one of these places. There should be a charge around here somewhere. Go and help your friend. I'll get it.
Sam looked over at Simon. He was lying in a pool of blood and his skin had gone an off grey.
Shit.
She said, dragging her body over to him in an incredible amount of pain. Immediately she took off her baggy hoodie, revealing her scar-covered arms as she pressed it against the wound Simon was bleeding out of.
Hang in there, Simon,
she said to him.
I found it,
Billy said, grabbing the phone charger that was under the wooden table.
How are they?
He added, running over to Sam.
Not good.
Sam said, looking at Simon and Curtis as she passed Billy her phone. Then she said,
We don't have enough time. You have to go upstairs and tell someone what's gone on. They need to help us.
They won't. I have blood all over me. They'll just give me an injection.
Please, Billy. If you don't do it, they're going to die.
Billy looked at Simon and Curtis. Then, without a second thought, he left. Chapter 25. Running out the laundry room and into the south wing of Franklin Medical Center, Billy had a huge adrenaline dump. He hadn't eaten in 5 days and his whole body had started cramping up, making the back of his legs spasm into a tight knot.
Help! Call an ambulance! Some people are seriously hurt.
Then, in the distance, a group of muscle-bound nurses appeared, marching towards him from the other end of the corridor.
Bollocks.
Billy trembled, laying on the floor. He knew this didn't look promising. But as they came running towards Billy with the intention of giving him a double dose of that green medicine, a fleet of sirens echoed from outside the building, making the nurses stop in their tracks. Then, within a matter of seconds, the front doors of Franklin Medical Center got taken clean off its hinges as a squadron of policemen and paramedics entered the old Victorian building by the numbers. "Where's Mrs. Miller?" they demanded to know, shouting at the woman working at the reception.
She's in now.
The woman said, pointing at Dr. Andrews' office. Instantly, the police ran towards the ferret's office, kicking the door clean off its hinges, only to find Mrs. Miller sitting in the same spot with the radio turned off in a somewhat meditative state. "Mrs. Miller, are you okay?" they asked her.
Yes.
Was her reply. The police were shocked. "But you said he drugged you, Mrs. Miller."
He has. But what he didn't realise was my heyday was in the 1960s, dear. He's given me some mushroom tea. But more importantly, I want you to read this,
she said, passing them the note Simon wrote. But in the south wing of the hospital, Billy was now being dragged up the corridor, kicking and screaming. The injection they tried giving him got kicked out their hands before being stamped on under Billy's foot until it shattered into multiple pieces. Then, as Billy was getting dragged into the main lobby of Franklin Medical Center, he saw a few of the paramedics that had been called by Mrs. Miller, so he screamed like his life depended on it.
Somebody help! They're in the laundry room, in a hidden room underneath the floorboards. He tried killing us!
But this was met by the nurses aggressively bending his arms back like a corkscrew until they almost popped out his shoulders like a wooden cork flying violently out the end of a champagne bottle. But the paramedics didn't believe Billy, and time was running out for Simon and Curtis, who were now merely inches away from death. Then, by the grace of God, the police came running into the lobby and asked Billy in a demanding way, Who's under the floorboards?"
Sam Curtis and, I think his name's Simon. They're in a bad way, man. Dr. Andrews tried killing us.
That was all Billy had to say for the police to ask the woman sitting behind the desk at the reception where the laundry room was. Startled, the woman told them immediately, and then the police were off, running as fast as they could to the hidden torture chamber underneath Franklin Medical Center. But when they got to the hidden room under the wood-chipped floorboards, it was much worse than they could have ever imagined. Curtis's head had swollen up like a balloon, and he was leaking with a thick, dark, clotted blood. Simon, on the other hand, had lost pints of blood and was an off-greyish white colour, and his lips had turned into an ice blue. Sam had been doing her best to revive him. As a matter of fact, the moment the police and paramedics entered the torture chamber, Sam was performing CPR on Simon, but from the looks of things, there was no hope for either of them. "We'll take over from here," a paramedic said to Sam. But while the paramedics were carrying Simon, Curtis and Sam out of the room in stretchers, one of the policemen shone his torch in the far corner of the room, and there he was. There was Dr. Andrews lying dead on the floor, with his throat hacked into ribbons. "Arrest the girl and that man in the lobby for murder," one of the policemen said to his colleagues. "Make sure someone stays with the other two. When they wake up, they'll need to be arrested too." "Is there any point?" his colleagues asked him. "None of these people would be fit to stand trial. I mean, they're in here." "No, just do it, and we'll let the CPS deal with the rest." "All right then." Chapter 26. After arriving at the hospital, Simon had slipped deeply into a bottomless coma. His mother had come to visit him religiously each and every day, but tragically it wasn't looking promising. On the upside, if you could call it that, Billy had told the police that he was responsible for killing Dr. Andrews and would now have to face trial for his murder. However, he didn't care. After all, he was already under the care of the NHS for his illness, which catastrophically took the life of his best friend. He thought he was working with the government, who he thought were trying to kill him, so tragically he stabbed him 76 times before turning up at the Houses of Parliament with a machete. Curtis had been on life support too, fighting for his life over the last 6 months. He was in the same hospital as Simon, but no one had come to visit him. Only Mrs. Miller had put it upon herself to sit by his bedside because, as far as she was concerned, Curtis was Simon's friend. Therefore he was her friend too. As for Sam, she had managed to make a full recovery after having her leg shattered by the demented Dr. Andrews. She had also been discharged from the mental health unit she was admitted to after Franklin Medical Center was closed. The police had done a thorough job connecting all the pieces of the demented puzzle together that Dr. Andrews had left. The pre-recorded tapes that were full of morbid suggestions, the ample amount of LSD that, if consumed, could have rendered the whole of London in a highly suggestive state, not to mention the amount of deaths that were marked down as accidental or suicide, only to be uncovered as something far more sinister. After being in a coma for 7 months and 1 day, sadly, Curtis passed away. He was on his own at the time of his death, which the doctor would later say was caused by a stroke and heart attack due to the horrific head injury he suffered at the hands of Dr. Andrews. Mrs. Miller, Simon's mum, had left flowers in the empty bed Curtis was staying in after she found out the horrifically depressing news. It was safe to say it broke her heart into thousands of pieces. But on the 8th of August, 9 months after being rushed to hospital, Simon still was unresponsive. It was on this date, though, he got a visitor. It was Sam. She was wearing a black hoodie with a Guns N' Roses logo on it, which was stretched down over her hands that were grasping onto a bouquet of flowers. She didn't say anything for an hour after she sat down next to Simon's bedside. She just held his hand while tears ran down her cheeks and onto the floor.
"Come on, Woodpecker, wake up."
She softly said, falling into a pit of loss and heartbreak.
"It's me, Sam, the annoying girl that sets off the fire alarm. Please, wake up."
But Simon wasn't moving.
"One of the doctors said that your dog's come to visit you. That's really cool. I wish I could meet him."
Suddenly, Sam could feel Simon lightly squeeze her hand as his eyes flickered open.
"Sam, is that you?"
He said, looking up at her with dark, sunken eyes.
"Yeah, you owe me some booze, you know."
Simon smiled. Then he asked her with a faded breath.
"Is my dog all right? I just had the strangest dream."
"He's good, yeah. He's been to see you, actually. Your mum and the doctor were telling me."
"Oh, thank God. Fud. I thought you were a goner."
Simon gasped. Then, after some time, he asked her.
"You've seen my mum?"
"Yeah."
Sam answered. Simon didn't say anything. Instead, he had a goofy type of smile spread across his face, like he was finally at peace, while he lovingly held Sam's hand. Spontaneously, Sam gave Simon a massive hug, while tears of joy rolled down her face.
"You're alive,"
she said, holding his face and looking into his eyes.
"I've missed you, Woodpecker."
And without saying another word, Sam and Simon kissed. The end.